Part 1. The Eagle's Shadow. Conquest by Gladius. The story begins not with a cross, but with an eagle. The Roman Empire was the ultimate political and military machine of the ancient world. Its power was predicated on the tangible, the sharpness of the gladius, the discipline of the legions, the relentless efficiency of its infrastructure, roads, aqueducts, and tax collection. Expansion was achieved through direct conquest, annexing territory, subjugating peoples, and assimilating their gods into a vast pantheon to ensure Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods. The emperor, whether called princeps or dominus, was the supreme political and, later, religious authority, as Pontifex Maximus, the greatest bridge builder between men and gods. The Senate represented the wealthy elite, the patricians, whose power was derived from land, wealth, and political lineage. This was an empire of laws, legions, and visible earthly power. Part 2. The Constantine Shift, from Caesar to Christ. The crisis of the 3rd century and the eventual division of the empire created a vacuum. Emperor Constantine the Great, a brilliant strategist, did not merely see Christianity as a personal faith, but as a potent unifying force for a fractured realm. The Edict of Milan, 313 AD, tolerating Christianity and his subsequent patronage, was a political masterstroke. He transferred the capital to Constantinople, New Rome, but the spiritual capital began its subtle shift to the Bishop of Rome. This was the critical transition. The old Roman elite, seeing the sun setting on the political might of the West, faced a dilemma: how to preserve their influence. Many did not abandon their power, they migrated it. They became influential patrons of the church, endowed it with land and wealth, and their sons entered the clergy, rising through its ranks. The structures of Roman administration were too effective to discard. The church adopted them. The Pope, from Latin papa, father, took on the mantle of a spiritual emperor. The cardinals, from cardo, meaning hinge, formed a curia, a senate of princes of the church. The diocesan structure perfectly mirrored the Roman provincial governance, with bishops acting as spiritual governors. The title Pontifex Maximus was eventually adopted by the popes, creating a direct symbolic link to imperial religious authority. Between the decline of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD and the establishment of the Holy Roman Empire in 800 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire continued, while in the West, a power vacuum formed, leading to various Germanic kingdoms. The Holy Roman Empire was a new entity, founded by the Pope, with the coronation of Charlemagne in 800 AD, which revived the title of emperor in the West to provide legitimacy and a connection to ancient Rome, though it was ultimately a German-dominated state rather than a direct continuation of the Roman Empire. Of course, this is a critical and fascinating period in history, often called the Dark Ages, but for the Roman Catholic Church, it was a time of immense transformation, challenge, and opportunity. Following the deposition of the last Western Roman Emperor, Romulus Augustulus, in 476 AD, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, found himself as the foremost authority figure in a crumbling Italy. There was no longer an emperor in the West to appeal to or to challenge. This vacuum of temporal power set the stage for the Church's evolution from a spiritual body into a political and territorial one. Key themes of the period: the rise of monasticism. As civil order broke down, monasteries, especially those following the rule of St. Benedict, established around 530 AD, became centers of stability, learning, agriculture, and preservation of classical knowledge. They were the primary agents of evangelization in the countryside. Conversion of the barbarians. The Church's survival depended on converting the Germanic kings who now ruled the former western provinces. This was a long process of aligning with powerful rulers. The Byzantine Schism. The Church in Rome grew increasingly distant from the Eastern Roman Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople. Theological, political, and cultural differences widened, leading towards the eventual Great Schism of 1554. The Papal States. The Church became a secular ruler. Through donations, like the donation of Pepin, it acquired territory in central Italy, governing it as a sovereign state. The alliance with the Franks. The pivotal relationship that would define European history for centuries. The papacy, unable to rely on the Byzantines for protection, turned to the rising Frankish kingdom for military support, culminating in the coronation of Charlemagne. The succession of popes. It is impossible to list every pope in this period, but the following highlights the most significant figures and the dynastic influences that often shaped the papacy. The Ostrogothic period and Byzantine reconquest, late 5th to mid-6th century. Pope Gelasius I, 492 to 496. Immediately after the fall of the empire, he famously articulated the doctrine of the two swords, spiritual and temporal power, asserting the superiority of papal authority over that of emperors and kings. Pope Symmachus, 498 to 514. His election was contested, leading to riots in Rome between his supporters and those of the anti-pope Laurentius. This illustrated how the papacy had become a prize fought over by powerful aristocratic families in Rome. Pope Hormisdas, 514 to 523. His family history is crucial. He was the father of Pope Silverius, 536 to 537, and his family was deeply entrenched in the Roman aristocracy. This era saw the papacy become a hereditary prize for a handful of powerful families. Pope Gregory I the Great, 590 to 604. Arguably the most important pope of this entire period. From an ancient senatorial family, he truly became the ruler of Rome. He organized city defenses against the Lombards, managed food supplies, and funded armies. He sent the Gregorian mission to convert the Anglo-Saxons in England, Augustine of Canterbury, dramatically expanding the Church's northern reach. He vigorously promoted Benedictine monasticism and standardized liturgical music, Gregorian chant. 7th century. This century saw a weakening of the papacy, caught between the Lombard threat in Italy and the distant Byzantine emperors who often promoted theological doctrines like monothelitism that the West rejected. Pope Martin I, 1649 to 1655. He defiantly condemned monothelitism without the Byzantine emperor's approval. For this, he was arrested by the emperor's exarch, taken to Constantinople, tortured, and exiled. His treatment showed the severe limits of papal independence when it challenged imperial power. Pope Sergius I, 1687 to 701. Another pope who resisted Byzantine doctrinal decrees. His election was also a messy affair between competing military and clerical factions in Rome. Again, showing the intense internal family politics. The break with Byzantium and the Frankish alliance. 8th century. Pope Gregory III, 731 to 741, the last pope to seek approval for his election from the Byzantine emperor. He faced the aggressive Lombard king Luitprand and, receiving no help from Constantinople, made the historic decision to appeal for help from the Franks under Charles Martel. Pope Zachary, 741 to 752. He formally ended the fiction of needing Byzantine approval for papal elections. He crucially endorsed the deposition of the last Merovingian king of the Franks and the accession of Pepin the Short, Charles Martel's son, as the new king, establishing a profound debt of gratitude. Pope Stephen II, facing a Lombard siege of Rome, he personally traveled to Francia to appeal to Pepin. He anointed Pepin and his sons as kings in a sacred ceremony, making the Frankish monarchy divinely sanctioned. In return, Pepin invaded Italy, defeated the Lombards, and donated the conquered territories to the Pope. This donation of Pepin created the Papal States, making the Pope a temporal sovereign. The culmination, the Holy Roman Empire. Pope Adrian I, 772 to 795, maintained the strong alliance with the Franks under Pepin's son, Charlemagne. Pope Leo III, 795 to 816, his pontificate defined the era. In 799, he was attacked by rivals in Rome, who accused him of perjury and adultery, and nearly blinded. He fled to Charlemagne for protection. Charlemagne restored him to Rome. In return, on Christmas Day, 800 AD, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans in St. Peter's Basilica. This act was revolutionary. It transferred the imperial title from the female ruler in Constantinople to a male Frank in the West. Established the precedent that the Pope had the authority to create an emperor, cementing the supremacy of the spiritual over the temporal power. Founded what would become the Holy Roman Empire, a fusion of Roman legacy, Christian faith, and Germanic power, with the papacy at its very core. For centuries, the papacy was controlled by a rotating set of ancient Roman senatorial families, the Anici, Simici, etc. They treated the office as a source of family prestige and political power, leading to violent and schismatic elections. It was not a clean, spiritual succession. The Holy Roman Empire, established in 800 AD with the coronation of Charlemagne, was not a mere extension, but a conscious revival of the Western Roman Empire under a Christian mandate. It was a more federated system, a collection of duchies, principalities, and kingdoms united under a single, in theory, emperor who derived his legitimacy from the Pope in Rome. This was the Roman Empire's ghost, wearing the robes of Christendom. Part 3. The Doctrine and the Deed. A Chasm of Practice. The foundational doctrine of Jesus Christ was radical in its context: love of God, love of neighbor, mercy, forgiveness, turning the other cheek, and a kingdom not of this world. It was a doctrine for the oppressed and the humble. The conduct of the institutional church that grew from Constantine's adoption, however, often stood in stark contrast. The Crusades, framed as holy pilgrimages to reclaim Jerusalem, they frequently devolved into brutal military campaigns, featuring the sack of Constantinople 124 and massacres of Jews and Muslims. The Albigensian Crusade against the Cathars, a clear example of using heresy as a pretext for political and territorial expansion. The Church sanctioned a bloody crusade against the Cathars in southern France, culminating in the massacre at Béziers, where the command, "Kill them all, God will know his own," was reportedly given. This was doctrinal enforcement through Roman military terror. Missionaries in the Americas. While some missionaries like Bartolomé de las Casas defended indigenous rights, the overall project was one of forced conversion, cultural genocide. Destroying native texts, temples, and idols was justified under the Requerimiento, a document demanding submission to church and crown. The goal was spiritual conquest alongside the physical one, mirroring Rome's assimilation policy, but with eternal stakes. Treatment of the Incas and early settlements. The conquest was fueled by a fusion of gold, glory, and gospel. Atahualpa was executed by Pizarro despite paying a ransom, and populations were decimated by disease and forced labor, all under the cross. The encomienda system was a feudalistic exploitation blessed by the Church. This behavior aligns less with the teachings of Christ and far more with the methods of the ancient Roman Empire: assimilation or annihilation, the suppression of local identities, and the establishment of control through a centralized, uncompromising hierarchy. The pornocracy, or rule of the harlots, and the Saculum Obscurum, or the Dark Age, from the 10th to 11th centuries. This period represents one of the lowest points for the papacy, where it became a political pawn of powerful Roman families. Pope John XII, 955 to 964. Elected at age 18, he was accused of turning the Lateran Palace into a brothel, ordaining a deacon in a stable, invoking pagan gods while gambling, committing adultery and incest, blinding his spiritual advisor, and castrating and then murdering a cardinal. He was deposed by Emperor Otto I for these crimes against God and man. Pope Benedict IX, 1032 to 1048 AD, the nadir of the era. He was installed as Pope around age 20 through his powerful family's influence. Multiple contemporary sources accuse him of vile orgies and being a demon from hell in his private life. He allegedly sold the title of Pope to his godfather, Gregory VI, to finance his marriage, though some historians debate this. He is the only person to have served as Pope for 3 separate periods, due to being deposed and reinstated multiple times. The Great Schism of the 13th and 14th centuries was a catastrophic period, with multiple rival popes claiming legitimacy, dividing Christendom and severely damaging the Church's spiritual authority. This was primarily a political power struggle between French and Italian cardinals. The Renaissance papacy, 15th and 16th centuries. Popes during this era acted more like secular Renaissance princes, the warrior popes, than spiritual leaders, leading to rampant nepotism, corruption, and patronage that became a primary cause of the Protestant Reformation. Pope Alexander VI, 1492 to 1503, Rodrigo Borgia, the most infamous Renaissance pope. He appointed his children, including Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia, to powerful and wealthy positions. His election was widely believed to be bought through bribery. He had multiple long-term mistresses and acknowledged his many children. His parties, like the banquet of chestnuts, were notorious for their debauchery. Pope Julius II, 1503 to 1513, the warrior pope, focused on military conquest to expand the Papal States. He was often depicted in armor, leading armies personally. His primary scandal was the blatant worldliness and militarism of the papacy, which directly inspired Martin Luther's critiques. Pope Leo X, 1513 to 1521. Giovanni de' Medici. His massive spending on art, like funding the new St. Peter's Basilica, and his lavish lifestyle, bankrupted the papal treasury. To raise funds, he aggressively sold indulgences, famously prompting Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517, which ignited the Protestant Reformation. His response to Luther was seen as dismissive and political. Part 4. The Syncretic Sanctuary. The Church was savvy in its absorption of pagan symbology to ease the transition for converts across the empire. Solar symbology. Christ was depicted as Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, with halos mirroring solar discs. His birth date was set on December 25th, coinciding with the Roman festival of Sol Invictus and the winter solstice. Egyptian influence. The iconography of Isis, the great mother goddess holding her son Horus, was directly transferred to the Virgin Mary holding the infant Jesus. This provided a powerful, familiar archetype for Mediterranean converts. Pagan temples and festivals. Temples were often converted into churches, and pagan festivals were rebranded with Christian meanings. This was a practical Roman strategy, built on existing foundations. Part 5. The Papal Caesars. A line of criticism. The history of the papacy is replete with conduct that echoes the worst of the Roman emperors. Popes like Julius II, also known as the warrior pope, led armies in full armor to expand the Papal States, a far cry from a fisher of men. The Borgia Pope, Alexander VI, used his office to advance his children, Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia, through wealth, political marriages, and violence, mimicking the dynastic ambitions of any patrician family. The sale of indulgences to fund projects like the new St. Peter's Basilica treated salvation as a financial transaction, leading to Martin Luther's protest. The opulence of the Renaissance papacy stood in stark contrast to the poverty of Christ. The doctrine of infallibility of 1870 conceptually echoes the absolute, unchallengeable authority claimed by emperors like Domitian. From contemporaries like Savonarola to reformers like Luther and modern historians, there is a constant criticism of the papal pursuit of temporal power, wealth, and political intrigue over spiritual leadership. Conclusion: the correlation of power. The correlations between the Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Catholic Church are profound and deliberate. The shift from political empire to religious empire was an act of immense political cleverness. It allowed the core power structure, centralized, hierarchical, expansionist, and assimilationist, to survive the collapse of its original political vessel. The financial and familial power structures of the old Roman elite simply found a new home, investing in the Vatican as the new capital of influence. The cross did not replace the eagle, it became its new standard. The legionary was replaced by the crusader and the inquisitor, but the impulse to conquer and control remained. The Senate was reconsecrated as the College of Cardinals. The emperor was bifurcated into the spiritual pope and the temporal Holy Roman Emperor, two halves of a whole that often struggled for dominance, just as emperors and senators once had. In the end, the distinction between the political and the religious, in this context, is often superficial. Both systems are ultimate expressions of the will to organize, control, and expand political power and wealth. The methods, symbology, and underlying structures of power remained remarkably consistent, proving that the most enduring empire is not one built on territory alone, but on faith and the unyielding institutions that govern it. If you like this video, please hit the subscribe button, and thank you for watching.